The combat of Dark Souls is amazing. The From Software developers were able to do something with the combat that the other Souls-like developers could not. There is something in their combat that is both simple and incredible. In this video, I will show you the true genius of the Dark Souls combat. Before I start talking about Dark Souls, I feel like I have to mention fighting games. Why fighting games? It's because both of them are considered somewhat difficult games. But if you have played both of them, you will know that there is some disparity in their difficulty. It is also quite easy to notice that one of them is more approachable than the other. The deep and complex combat of fighting games has been a hurdle for a lot of people, and yet Dark Souls is considered more popular as a difficult game. Why is that? The answer to that question: simplicity. Simplicity is what makes the combat of Dark Souls quite approachable. Now, just because I said approachable does not mean the game is easy. The game is still difficult. But due to simplicity, it is quite easy to pick up and play. There is another word I would like to mention: accessibility. Not a controversial word by itself unless you bring Dark Souls to the mix. Regardless of what both sides have to say in this, the game is, in my opinion, quite accessible. How is that, you may ask? Like I mentioned before, simplicity. But I have to also mention that the game is not quite accessible in a way you might think. It is because the controls are quite easy and simple, it makes the game somewhat accessible. But you may also think, how are the controls related to accessibility? For that, we may have to take a look at our supposed tools. In game, you have your attack button, dodge roll button, and that's about it. While I may be ignoring a lot of other type of offensive and defensive options, these two buttons are what you need to finish the game. Because of just these two buttons, the number of options at your disposal is quite easy to comprehend in your mind. You really don't want to confuse the players, especially the players who are not yet experienced in this type of game, and thus the game becomes simple and accessible if you are looking from the perspective of newer players. There is another aspect of this combat that I would like to mention. Let me start with combo. Do you know who can do combo in the game? It is definitely not us, the players, due to the aforementioned simplicity. It is actually the enemies who can. The enemies use all kinds of wacky combos and the players simply cannot. But despite the simplicity in its controls, the options to deal with that kind of challenge is not limited. As we know already, the game heavily relies on the players to understand enemy pattern recognition. By understanding the pattern, the players can freely decide when and how much attack is needed and where to dodge the enemy's attack/combo. Stamina management is also a thing that you have to consider. In short, I want to say that there exists some decision making in the gameplay, despite the simplicity and the enemy's ability to do some combo. Unfortunately, despite the fact that the combat feels special, From Software did not invent it. You can date it back to the first 3D Zelda game and to some extent Monster Hunter series. Fortunately, inspiration is not much of a bad thing when you can learn from the others and are able to give your own unique spin. In conclusion, From Software were able to make the combat of the game feel tense and difficult despite the simplicity. The controls were designed to not confuse the players, and due to this, the decision making during the combat becomes quite manageable. Because of all of this, the Dark Souls combat is kind of a genius.